Hi, I'm David Anderson.
And I'm Natalie Anderson.
And today we're talking about leadership lessons from the Netflix show The Crown.
Specifically Season 3, Episode 6, Tywysog Cymru.
Or The Prince of Wales in English.
This episode of The Crown, named Tywysog Cymru, follows Prince Charles as a college-aged boy as he travels to Wales before his investiture in July of 1969. In the months Charles spent studying Welsh, he formed an unlikely friendship with his teacher and Welsh nationalist Edward Millward. This friendship helped Charles understand Welsh people's concerns about the crown and led him to making an emotional and somewhat political speech in Welsh at his investiture. This speech was in support of Welsh culture and autonomy, among other political issues, such as the relevance of the royal family in the 20th century.
What lesson about leadership can be learned from this episode?
So, the episode demonstrates several of the character traits in our leadership maturity model. For example, we see the Queen putting duty before family, and we see a young Prince Charles who is being coached that he has to put duty before his personal interests, because eventually he'll become the king and he has to put duty before everything. So he's a kind of a typical teenager at college, and he's like, hey, I'm really happy at Cambridge. No, but you have to move to Wales for a term or a semester. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that, but you have to. It's your duty. So the episode demonstrates duty-driven leadership. But specifically, I chose this episode because it teaches us the power of empathy for a leader. So there had been a historical problem that the previous two princes of Wales basically just showed up for the ceremony, got the crown on their head and never came back again. They didn't speak Welsh, they weren't Welsh, they didn't understand Wales or know its history, and they had no connection with the Welsh people. And by this time in the 1960s, there was a Welsh nationalist movement, a movement for an independent Wales, self-governing Wales. And the British government, the Labour government under the Prime Minister Harold Wilson, they were concerned that this was a bad trend. So they asked the Queen to send Prince Charles to Wales to make him a bit more Welsh. And he wasn't that keen on doing it, but actually it was a huge step in his development. After he spent some time there, he really learned to understand the Welsh people much better.
How does empathy affect the maturity of an organization?
So, at a low maturity level, what we see is pity or sympathy. And we see leaders that are perhaps focused on popularity, where empathy is really about a much deeper understanding that if someone's unemployed, for example, you can have pity on them, or I'm terribly sorry you lost your job. You could have some sympathy for them by saying, and here's some unemployment benefit for 6 months or some social security payments, so that you're not in poverty and hardship until you find a new job. That's sympathetic behaviour. Empathetic behaviour is creating new jobs and new opportunities so that an unemployed person can find a new job. Because collecting unemployment benefits is not very dignified. But it's necessary if you're hungry, if you have to keep the lights on in your house, but it's not dignified. I don't think anyone wants to be unemployed, and they don't want to receive handouts from their government, the taxpayer, a charity, whoever it is. They don't want charity. What they want is opportunity. So empathy is about recognizing that. Empathy is this higher level thing. So more mature leaders, they have empathy, and they try to create a dignified opportunity. Another way that I've put it, if we were to consider the current and recent war in Ukraine, at the beginning of the war, sympathy was sending medical aid, for example, and relief, whether it was medications or clothing and perhaps equipment to help refugees, like tents for them to stay in, that kind of thing. But empathy is realizing that the Ukrainians have the right to defend themselves. Empathy is sending tanks. Sympathy is sending first aid. Empathy is sending tanks. So higher maturity leaders, they develop an empathy, and we see Prince Charles, this young guy who's basically about your age at the time, and living sort of immersed for a term of college with the Welsh people. He learns to understand them, and he forms an empathy for them. He's not sympathetic to Welsh people. He doesn't feel sorry for them, but he realises what they need, and what they need is an ability to express themselves, to have a voice, to be heard, to be respected, and he achieves that, and that enables him to, by the end of the episode, he goes on a 4-day tour of Wales, where he's very popular as a consequence of the empathy that he's shown for them, where that could have gone completely the other way. He could have gone on a 4-day tour and they'd all have been booing and protesting against him. So empathy is a higher level than sympathy or pity. The sympathy is important, particularly immediately. Say there's been a natural disaster, an earthquake, a hurricane, something, sending aid to help people. And you go to college in New Orleans and it's suffered from hurricanes, and a lot of damage gets done. Well, people need immediate help, but the long-term thing is to invest in rebuilding, to give people back somewhere to live, somewhere to work, their dignity, and to allow them to return back to the life they knew before the natural disaster.
Is there a conflict between empathy and achieving your desired outcome?
I think it's a good question, because the fact that you understand someone and therefore you can anticipate what they need, their needs might not be aligned with your needs. That there could be a situation, say a business leader, they know that there's a business that's strategically not doing well, or it's end of life, or it's not very profitable. And you could have an empathy for the people who work in the factory, but you still know that the factory has to close down. So, for example, your grandfather, who worked for ICI, and specifically the Nobel's Explosives Company, they made TNT and nitroglycerin and explosives for the mining industry on the west coast of Scotland. And that made sense when there was a lot of coal mines and other heavy industry in the United Kingdom or in Europe. But by the time your grandfather was towards the end of his career and I was a young man, most of those explosives were being exported to Africa for coal mines and diamond mines and things. So they moved the business to South Africa. They built a factory in South Africa, and the Scottish factory didn't make any sense. Now, The chairman of the company at the time wrote a very good book, a memoir, when he retired, and he talks a little bit about decisions like that having to close. The other factory on the same location made liquid nylon that was then eventually spun into, thread and fabric. And it was a bulk chemical business that was very low profitability. So they decided to exit that and close the factory. That was like 7,000 jobs, just pop. So you can have empathy for people, but you still have to get the job done. So if you're closing down a factory and 7,000 people lose their job, an empathetic thing to do will be to help people. Sympathy is, here's some money to tide you over in the meantime. Go find another job. Empathy would be that we're going to put some investment into the location. And some of the office buildings were converted into sort of incubator units for startup companies. And some of the people who lost their jobs, usually sort of middle manager level people, they were encouraged to start new companies. And some of my father's friends or grandfather's friends, they started a business making basically metal boxes. But eventually their biggest customer became the IBM PC factory about 30, 40 miles away. So they were manufacturing the enclosures, the boxes for the PCs. And that turned into a successful company that employed hundreds of people. So empathy doesn't mean that you can't get the job done. If you were just sympathetic and pitiful of people, maybe you would be afraid to make a tough decision. Empathy, you can still make the tough decision, but you'll do what you can to ensure that the affected people have a dignified exit.
Last question is, what do you hope that your students get out of this episode?
So the key takeaway and the reason for watching this episode is watching this journey that Prince Charles takes, where he develops an empathy for the Welsh people, and he shows some personal courage because he rewrites the official speech that the government had given him, and it's in Welsh, so the British government don't even know what he said. It was 2 days later before his mother got the translation of what he'd actually said, and it was a little controversial. And what he was doing was laying down a marker that he was signalling that as the Prince of Wales, he's not yet the king. So he's not the defender of the Constitution. That's his mother's job. And his mother's job she has to be apolitical. She can't be seen to take sides, because the government at one time might be conservative, and then there's an election, and then it's a Labour government. And the head of state, the Queen, can't be seen to be on one side or the other. Has to be neutral. But Prince Charles, he's not in that job yet, and he lays down this marker and he says, you know what? I can stand up for the Welsh people. I can help you to have a voice. I can recognise that the government should be listening to you. You should be treated with more respect. And he can use his platform to promote that. And that was the beginning. As he got a little older, another title he has, the Duchy of Cornwall, that most of that southwestern tip of England is land that belongs to the Crown Prince, basically. And it's farmland. Right. So Prince Charles was a very big farmer. He's with tenant farmers, people who rent the land and farm it. And he turned all of that into organic farming in the 1970s. And he became Europe's largest organic farmer and a big advocate for organic farming and healthy and very ethical means of growing food. And then he started to campaign for better architecture and better social housing. And he formed an empathy with underprivileged youth, because he would spend a lot of time visiting inner cities, big cities like Birmingham or Manchester. And he recognised that perhaps the government wasn't doing enough to help these underprivileged kids. So he started a charity which was called the Prince's Trust. It's recently renamed as the King's Trust. And actually I saw today that David Beckham has just been made like an ambassador for the King's Trust. So that was in the news this morning. So he started this charity, and the charity raised money from rich people, and then they used it to create opportunity for these underprivileged young people. And the numbers are really stunning. The Prince's Trust has given something like 1.2 million young people the startup capital to start their own businesses, as well as doing many other things like helping people to in their personal development by taking them on maybe outward bound activities in the mountains, and just generally giving opportunity to young people who didn't have any. So we see in this episode that he's this 19-year-old kid who's laying down this marker of, I can use my position, my influence to help some causes go in the right direction. And with the Welsh people, they're a proud nation, about 2 million of them, a little more than 2 million perhaps. They've got this deep heritage over millennia. They've got their own very unique language. And the geography of Wales meant that it was hard work, whether it was farming or mining or other industrial activities. These were hard-working people. And in the late 20th century, a lot of these industries were in decline. So the people were struggling, and they weren't getting enough respect or enough help from outside. And they felt that if we were in charge of our own destiny, then perhaps we'll do better. Now, what would it be, 20 plus years later, Wales achieved an autonomous government. There's a Welsh Parliament nowadays. So they have self-determination, very similar to the Basque Country here in Spain, where we're sitting at the moment. That it's not a fully independent country, but they have a lot of autonomy, a lot of self-control, and that's given them back a lot of their respect. And Prince Charles did his little bit to help take that in the right direction. And it's quite courageous, because his mother definitely didn't approve. You see that at the end. He was willing to stand up to her.
If you are interested in learning more about leadership and management, please visit djaa.com to view our classes and pricing.